With us this morning, Reverend Monica William. She is the lead pastor for the West Bloomfield United Methodist Church. Thank you so much for being with us.
Good morning. I'm glad to be with you.
How are things going over at your church? We're 1 year into this pandemic.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's already been a year, and yet it's been a long year, hasn't it?
It really does feel like Groundhog Day, doesn't it?
It does. It's amazing, actually, when we look back at all of the ways that we've had to adjust the ways that we reach out to people and do our ministry and our work and all of this. It's pretty amazing to see how much things have changed. What we're trying to do hasn't changed, right? But the way we do it has really been different.
So, Reverend, can we take you back to a year ago? Because I do believe it was about a year ago this weekend that church services were also closed down. And we remember those beginning days. It was going to be for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Walk us through the beginning stages, but also how you've managed as this pandemic has dragged on.
Yeah, well, for our church, it's actually been an interesting journey. Those early days, I was on a leave of absence at the time, and we had a pastor that was leading the church for a couple months when all of that happened. And so I was not here with my church when they had to move everything online. So the pastor that was here was Reverend Brent Webster, and he did a fantastic job of getting everybody online, and he opened up a Zoom account for the church, and for several weeks we did worship that way, where everybody just logged into Zoom and we did worship live together. And we found that there were some great things about Zoom that brought us all together and gave everybody a chance to see one another and check in, which was so important, especially in those early days, right?
We all knew about Zoom before this, right?
Yeah, nobody knew. We also learned pretty quickly that Zoom is not a very good way to try to sing. I don't know if you've ever tried to sing on Zoom, but music is really hard to make happen that way. It was a bit of a disaster, so
it is.
Had to learn a lot and adjust. Yeah.
So, but with that, so you go through those beginning stages, you miss out on it. Then you come in and you're trying to dip your toes and get reacclimated to this new world to try to minister your congregation. What's it been like for you personally?
It's been a real struggle. You know, there have been times personally where I've been at the end of my rope, and there have been times I've been really encouraged and excited. It's been amazing to watch the people of this church learn how to do ministry in this way. People have really stepped forward and said, we need to learn how to do this, and we're going to make it happen. When I first started at this church, actually a year before that, we had, they lost the pastor very suddenly to death. And on Easter Sunday in 2019, they didn't even know how to turn on their sound system because the pastor had taken care of that. And we've gone from that to being able to live stream our worship services on YouTube and be able to connect together with one another on Zoom. We've learned how to set up a video camera and connect with people remotely in so many different ways. It's been amazing to watch the creativity. How can we be together and yet care for each other in this time by not being together?
But as someone who is the pastor, part of those Sunday sermons is the energy you get from the room. What's that been like to lead a congregation without them and their energy around you?
It's difficult, and I've noticed when I look at recordings of my sermons that the energy level goes up and down based on that particular day. I find there's when you're preaching to a room of people, you're really focused on your people. When you're preaching to a camera, you're focused on what's going on behind the camera as much as you are on your preaching, right? So it's a challenge. I actually had a friend of mine just a couple weeks ago logged in on a Zoom call to watch me preach while I was recording it. And even that alone was helpful, just to have somebody who was there specifically just to hear me preach. You know, finding ways to bring people into the room with you ends up being as important as you go into them in these times, for sure.
Well, we all know that a church is more than the walls that surround it. It is about the members of the church. But this is also such a hard time because when it comes to stressful times in our life, we turn to the church to help bring us together and help lift us up. How have you been able to do that virtually?
Well, during the virtual times, one of the things we have done is we've made sure that we've used the old-fashioned telephone quite a bit. We have a shepherding ministry where not only I, but several members of our church just go through our roster of connections, people who are members and people who have been part of our church one way or another, and we just call them on a regular basis to make sure that we're connecting with them. If there's things that are going on in people's lives, those folks will let me know so that I can be better in touch with people that have extra challenges. And the number of people who have needed care and have been in crisis this year, both physical health and mental health, has been just overwhelming. I've never had a care list of the size that I have here. I've served larger churches, but I've never had a larger group of people to care for.
Yeah, and I think all churches are pretty much experiencing what you're experiencing as well. Reverend Monica William with us here on the MegaCast. She's the lead pastor for the West Bloomfield United Methodist Church. So how have you been able to reach out to them with limited connection? Have you relied on other members of the congregation? I know that typically if you're a member of a church, you have kind of like the old school way was, a phone tree. Or if someone, if someone passed away, then it was your day to drop off the casserole or something of that nature. Are you still doing those traditional things?
We still do that. Yeah, absolutely. We still do those things. And, because we have people that are used to that, and those certainly are ways that we are able to connect more directly with people and on a deeper level. For those times when we need to just keep people informed and all those kinds of things, we've been using email, we've been using YouTube, we've been using Facebook. It's kind of an all of the above sort of a thing. When the weather's been good enough, we have met outside. If everybody brings a lawn chair and wears our masks, and we sit 6 feet away from each other outside, and we were able to do worship outdoors for quite a while the weather was nice. And then from time to time, even we brave the cold and get together just so we can see each other's faces and check in with one another too. So we've tried all kinds of things, and different things work at different moments, I think. And so we've remained flexible with that.
One of the things with me when I see people in person, though, I'm such a hugger, and it's so automatic. So if you haven't seen members of your congregation and then they come in, how do you kind of address that? I feel like it's a new social discussion. I'm not being rude. I'm trying to respect you in your space.
Very much so. In fact, we did at one point consider moving indoors for worship. And we had a whole plan that we had put together for how we were going to make sure that people were socially distanced in our sanctuary, and we were going to make sure we didn't sing, and everybody was going to come in at the last minute, and we would have a brief worship service, and everybody would leave, and we could socialize outside if we were going to, and all of these things. And the team that had planned it got together to try and run it, and none of us could follow our own rules. We couldn't even follow our own rules, and we realized pretty quickly that if we couldn't do it, we couldn't ask the whole congregation to do it, right? And so we ended up not moving indoors because we knew that we weren't going to be able to socially distance, because we are a church that loves to be together, and people want to hug, and they want to talk, and they want to catch up with one another. And so we needed to find ways to do that didn't provide those opportunities for us to get too close to each other, unfortunately.
So as we start to move into reduced restrictions and the vaccine is becoming more widely available, are you doing any in-person worshiping services right now at all?
At the moment, no. My team that's been kind of tracking how we handle our COVID responsibilities spoke about a week ago, and we are paying attention to the fact that more and more of our members are being able to be vaccinated, but we're not anywhere near that capacity to say we have a herd immunity even among ourselves yet. We didn't feel like it was fair for us to say, if you're vaccinated, you can come, and if you're not, too bad. But we have and we also looking at these new variants that are going on in our nation and in the world, and how we don't know how that's going to impact even the effectiveness of a vaccine, right? So we're trying to be cautious about that. However, as the weather's getting warmer, for instance, for Easter, we're going to have an outdoor Easter sunrise service down at Marshbank Park. And we'll have a brief service where we can be outside together. And we're probably going to have a communion service later on Easter Sunday here out on the church property, where we can be outside for a brief period of time, and it's a little easier to keep everybody and people can be 6 feet away from each other, or they can be 20 feet away from each other, whatever feels safest for folks. And people have been really good about learning how to do that outside so far.
Well, fingers crossed that the weather cooperates and it's beautiful that weekend. Reverend Monica William with us here on the MegaCast. She's the lead pastor over at the West Bloomfield United Methodist Church. When we're talking about church services, it's not just the Sunday service. We're talking weddings and funerals and baptisms. And I'm thinking, when I plan my wedding, there is so much effort and time and money that goes into it, and then have it canceled or restricted during COVID because of the restrictions and the changes. How has that portion of your church service been?
Yeah, that's been, I've had, especially when it comes to weddings, of course, I've been working directly with couples on what works best for them. We did have one wedding in our church building this summer. And that service ended up being pretty much just immediate family, and everybody in that group was able to kind of self-quarantine for a couple weeks before to make sure that that was a fairly safe experience. So we did do that. That is the only wedding that I did this summer. I have had a couple that just decided to postpone for a year. I have another one that's planning something outdoors and are still deciding how big of a guest list they're going to be able to have. So people are making different choices around that. And it's a hard time to try to be getting married. Funerals are a similar issue, right? The one funeral that I've had to do, fortunately, I've only needed to do one funeral since the pandemic began. And we did that outdoors we had kind of a graveside service with just family. And we're able to make that, this is one of those times where that need to be with each other and care for each other. Sometimes you need to take a little bit of a risk in order to care for each other. There's balancing those needs that people have. Early on in the pandemic, we had my mother and stepfather completely quarantined in their house, and we didn't want them going out for anything. And when we realized it was going to be long term and my stepfather got very sick, we realized this isn't living. There are risks you need to be able to take, and everybody has a different line for that. But to be able to say, being together and having family and having friends, on some level, you need to find space for that, and doing that in the ways that it's as safe as possible. But there are some risks you have to accept in order to keep living your life.
Yeah, and with that, and I think that every family has had similar discussions throughout this entire year as well, because while in the beginning, when we thought it was going to be 2 weeks or a month, we could live with that and we could deal with that. But then as it continued to carry on, people were worried about so many of the side effects too that we're not seeing on the surface. So with that too, you had mentioned at the beginning of the interview about so many people reaching out and they have different needs during this pandemic. This is something we've never experienced in our lives, and we hope to not have to go through it again. But what do you think is going to be the long-term effect for this for members of your congregation? Do you think it's going to be 6 months, 8 months, 9 months later, and we're still going to be dealing with some of the side effects of this pandemic?
Oh, well, yeah, I think that this has changed a lot of things for us, and I think a lot of those are permanent changes. Some of those are very unfortunate and sad losses. You think about all of the people that we've lost across this community, across this nation, that we've not even been able to publicly share our grief over. That's going to leave a mark on our nation for years and years to come. There's so many things that will be weighing on us. The way that our kids have been isolated from one another and not been able to be with their friends, be active in the things that they've done, all of those things You hope that we'll be able to catch up and replace those things, but those have changed lives. Those things have changed lives, no question. On the other side, there's also been this amazing thing where people have become more comfortable using technology that's been available to us for years, but we've never learned to use it. It's always seemed too overwhelming to try, but when that was our only option, my 92-year-olds are learning how to use it, right? Because if they're going to be social, they need to learn how to use their computers a little bit more. And so I'm sure as a church, we'll have a much larger presence in the digital world and be more available to people. I've loved how people that I know on the other side of the world, it's like they're right in my living room. I cooked with somebody in China and in Indonesia last weekend. We did dinner here, and they were making breakfast, and we were able to connect with each other. But that also means that the ministries of this church, we did a partnership fundraiser for Liberia missions this year, and we had the calendar that we were selling, and we partnered not only with a church in Northville, but also one in Georgia. And we were able to do ministry together in a way like it was the same doing something with Northville as it was with people in Georgia, because the distance became like nothing, right? So those have been just amazing, wonderful things to see the way that we've been able to adapt in those ways as well. So there have been some really great things that have come out of this. We've been forced to get creative and change and reinvent how we do things. So it's been a time of great creativity. I think it's cut both ways in that sense.
And in some ways, while we've all had to learn to use technology in a new way, we've also gone back to the basics, which has allowed us to really count our blessings for the simple things as well, especially toilet paper and hand sanitizer. So all of that stuff really is, you start to look at your world a bit differently, and you appreciate the things that we do have. With that, Reverend Monica William, she's the lead pastor at the West Bloomfield United Methodist Church. We so appreciate your time here today.
It's been great to be with you. I had one other thing I wanted to make sure to share with the community, if I could.
Sure, most definitely.
So I've been working as we're coming up close to Easter, the week before Easter is known as Holy Week, and several of the West Bloomfield community churches are going to be having a progressive prayer walk. We're going to set up prayer stations on our church properties, and we're inviting the community to come during that whole week. From dusk to dawn, we're to stop by any of the churches or even all of them, and it's just an invitation to come and have a quiet place to pray and meditate and just reflect as we come towards Easter and spring and all of those things. And we just want to invite everybody to come and know that the churches are still here for you, and we're available. The pastors and the people are here to be part of the community even in these times.
Well, we so appreciate you sharing that with us, and we thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you so much. It's been great to be with you.